All right, guys, Gemini back with another special investigation today. Today we're going to investigate something that has never sat right with me in my mind for being a wrestling fan, a WWE, WCW fan for 30 years. Something that just never felt right. And today we're going to examine why Hulk Hogan never fought Ric Flair at a WrestleMania. Was it money? Was it power? Was it just not right? Let's get into the money aspect. Did Hulk Hogan feel that potentially Ric Flair didn't make enough money in his career to wrestle Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania? Was in Hogan's mind, was Ric Flair not a big enough star who made enough money to deem Hulk Hogan's presence at a WrestleMania? Let's look into that question. Let's find out exactly how much money did Ric Flair make being a professional wrestler. Let's take a look. Now, I'm looking at some research here on Ric Flair's career earnings because we're asking the question, why did Hogan never wrestle Ric Flair at WrestleMania 8 or WrestleMania 18 in Toronto? They were both there. They were both in wrestling shape. They both wrestled different opponents that day. So let's see. Rick, the Nature Boy Flair, has a net worth of $5 million. He's considered one of the greatest wrestlers ever to step foot in the squared circle. Yes, best I ever saw, besides Shawn Michaels. So let's see. What was Ric Flair pulling down in WCW? $750,000 a year. Ric Flair got $700,000 a year as the NWA World Champion in 1987, 1988. That's a lot of money for 1987 money. So it couldn't have been that WWE and Ric Flair didn't make enough money. Hogan couldn't have thought in his head, oh, Flair doesn't make enough money. Well, let's see how much money Hulk Hogan was making to possibly come to that assumption. Okay, so I saw a net worth from Hogan right here. It says $8 million. Flair had $5 million. Hogan lost millions in his divorce, but still he lives in a $300 million home, $600 million mansion. He made $150,000 off of one match with Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 19. So they both made a ton of money, almost equal amount of money. Hogan made more being up in New York. That was more valuable than Charlotte and Georgia. So Hogan made more money, but I'm going to rule out the money aspect. I don't think Hogan didn't fight Flair based on how much money Flair made. So let's take the next angle. All right, so Jem ruled out the money aspect. I showed you guys that Ric Flair made tons of money, $700,000 a year, 1987 money. So at this time, we're going to cross out the money aspect. Money has nothing to do with it. Now, the next thing that possibly could have not had their match at WrestleMania 8, it could have been a power aspect. Hulk Hogan could have gone into the match with trepidation, thinking, maybe Ric Flair won't lose to me. Maybe Ric Flair won't do the job. And there's only one way that we can determine if Ric Flair was the kind of guy to do a job at WrestleMania, even though he did a job that day to Randy Savage. Let's find out if Ric Flair was a selfish wrestler who was afraid to lay down to Hulk Hogan, and this caused Hogan's fear going into the match, thinking Flair wasn't going to job. Let's find out exactly what Ric Flair's career record was and how many times he lost in his career, because I'm having my doubts on a power thing. Let's take a look. Now, we're examining the power thing. Like, was Hogan afraid that Flair wasn't going to job to him, even though Flair has gone on record and said, yeah, I would have lost to him, just pay me. I'm trying to think about Ric Flair's career win-loss record. There's no actual record of, like, but let's just guesstimate here. Let's guesstimate for a second. Ric Flair probably wrestled 10,000 pro wrestling matches since his debut in the early 70s. Let's just guesstimate here. 10,000 pro wrestling matches. No hard statistical data. 10,000 wrestling matches, and he probably lost 3,000, I want to say. So he won 7,000, he lost 3,000. So that means that Ric Flair potentially laid down for an opponent 3,000 times in his life. So if Hogan knew that Flair lost 300,000 or 3,000 times in his career, there should have been no fear, no hesitation on Hogan being scared to wrestle Flair because Flair was afraid to job. I mean, 3,000 is a rough estimate. It could be more like 4,000, 5,000. But if you remember Ric Flair's last run in WCW, he didn't win a match like the last 5-6 years. He put everybody over. He put Sting over. He put Luger over. He put over Macho Man, whoever WCW and WWE wanted. Okay, so now let's take a look at something that happened with me. It was an interaction I had with Hulk Hogan about, 6-7 years ago, asking him the same question. Now, as you guys know, Hulk Hogan is on Twitter. So, years ago, me and my internet wrestling friends here, we knew that Hulk Hogan, he was tweeting out stuff how he was in a hospital bed. And Jem had the idea, I don't remember who I was talking to, like Luke or Morgan or somebody, but I'm like, dude, Hogan's in the hospital bed, man. He's probably bored stiff. And we should tweet at him and see if we can get some interaction from him because he's probably bored in the hospital room from his back surgery. So me and MC and a bunch of guys start tweeting at Hulk, right? And I'm going on and on with Hulk, and I ask him about Hogan, or ask him about Andre at WrestleMania 3, and ask him all these questions, and he's like, man, Andre was so heavy when he slammed him, and blah, blah, blah. And so Hogan makes this little video back to all of us, me and MC. He's like, oh, you guys are cool, brother, especially that Cena guy, because I had a Cena Twitter handle at the time, and it was cool. Finally, I just asked Hogan flat out, I said, why did you not wrestle Ric Flair at WrestleMania 8? When Hogan tweets back at me, and he says, it was just too big. Vince couldn't control it, brother. Vince couldn't control it, but Vince McMahon can run a multi-million-dollar empire, keep all his wrestlers in check, make all this money, be a huge corporate entity all over the world, and handle all this, but he couldn't handle one match between Flair and Hogan at WrestleMania 8 because what? The egos were too big? I'm baffled at what decisions they were making to have Hogan versus Sid. Hogan and Flair at a WrestleMania would have been one for the ages. Later capitalizing on the success was WCW, who 2 years later, July 17th, 1994, they did their Bash at the Beach pay-per-view, and it was the most successful WCW pay-per-view that they ever did. I don't get it. And not only that, but this was the feud that carried WCW for the next 2 years. They ran Flair and Hogan 94, 95 in WCW, even a little bit in 96, and it carried the promotion, eventually helping them beat WWE for a long time with the help of Hogan and Flair, going back and forth in the NWO angle. So, still to this day, I can't come to a conclusion why Hogan and Flair didn't go at it at WrestleMania 18, which would have been a WrestleMania Dream match back in 2002, or didn't go at it during both wrestlers' prime run, which was 1992 at WrestleMania 8. The only thing I can think of, is either one, Hogan didn't want to lose to Flair because this power aspect. The way I view it as Flair had no trouble doing the job to Hogan, but Hogan had trouble doing the job to Flair if asked. So Flair and Hogan didn't want to do business because Hogan refused a job if they were going to put Flair over. Or McMahon was thinking, no, we can't have Flair lose because we're going to have him do other things in 92. It's just the move still doesn't make sense why we never had a WrestleMania match with the two biggest stars of all time. You guys have to remember, Ric Flair was the NWA. He was on one side, he was the world champion on Channel 17, just killing it. And Hogan was the WWF guy. So if you're a wrestling fan at those times, you turn on one channel, it was all about Flair. You turn on another channel, it was all about Hogan. Why you wouldn't match them up in this dream match? It had to be Hogan putting the squash on it. Because Hogan, for me, had more of an ego back then than Flair. Even though Flair had a big one. It must have been Hogan and McMahon saying, no, this is a bad idea. How was it out of control? How could you not control it? It's still a mystery to this day how they dropped the ball in this one. If you guys have any comments below on why this match potentially didn't happen, please comment below, because I'm curious, and this is a question that's been burning in my mind for years, why they put together a so-so WrestleMania 8 when it could have been one for the record books. Would the match been that? Now, I've heard reports that they tested this match out in New York, and it didn't go over that well. And I'm like, okay, from what I've seen on the tape, you guys sold out the Garden and had a big reaction for Flair and Hogan, and the crowd had fun. That crowd that day at the Hoosier Dome, they needed this. That WrestleMania 8 crowd with Tatanka and Rick the Model Martel, whatever it was, and Owen Hart and Skinner, no. They didn't even do the Warlord and the Bulldog. Weren't they do, or they're supposed to do like the Warlord or Berserker versus the Bulldog that they didn't even do that match. So WrestleMania 8 flopped in Indianapolis, and they've never been back since. I mean, if they do this match, does that change the landscape? Does Indianapolis get a WrestleMania back? Is WrestleMania 8 revered as one of the best WrestleMania 8s of all time, or one of the best WrestleManias of all time? Which is the question you got to ask yourself, is why? And then years later, 2002, 10 years later, they have the opportunity to do it again at WrestleMania 18. Yeah, they went with Rock and Hogan. Yeah, it's an iconic moment. But you had Flair wrestling The Undertaker, which was great. And then you had Hogan and The Rock, which was more money. But sometimes it's not about the money. Sometimes you have to take the 80s icons, have them do the dream match, like on The Wrestler, the Ayatollah versus the Ram, 20 years later. I know we saw it in WCW time and time again, in the matches were so-so, but still, WWE, to me, they still have me baffled on this one. Please type your comments below and let me know what you think. Thank you so much.